Okay, we should be live.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Sage Turner, Chair of the Asheville Regional Housing Consortium. I'd like to welcome you to our March 6, 2023 meeting. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen in live today by phone, and you can do that by dialing 855-925-2801. That's 855-925-2801, and enter the meeting code 8763. For those of you out there joining us and listening in, welcome. I will now go through and introduce all board members and staff leadership. If you could, when you hear your name, come off mute and say a quick hello. Robin Merrill.
Good morning.
Good morning. Karen Kina. Thought I saw Karen. Okay, no Karen. Ben Woody. I don't see Ben yet. Jennifer.
Good morning, everybody.
All right. Eric Rufa. I think I saw you. No, Eric? You're all so small on my screen. I'm sorry. Okay. Elizabeth Hanson.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. John Connett. Jonathan Jones. Saw you.
Good morning.
Matt Cable.
Good morning.
Aaron Bland. No Aaron. Okay. Forrest Gilliam. Okay. Ricky Hurley. Okay. Katie Hayes. I saw Katie. Kate.
Morning.
Katie.
And
Yep.
actually,
Um,
when you finish roll call, do you mind giving it back to me for a quick introduction for someone on our team?
Sure.
Thanks.
Alice Berry.
Here, thanks.
Hi, Alice. Thank you. All right. And some staff leadership. So Community and Economic Development Director for the City of Asheville, Nikki Reed.
Good morning.
And Community Development Coordinator, Dana Alley. I saw her. Here she is.
Hi.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. And maybe we'll see a couple more come in. I just got confirmation that Ben Woody will not be able to join us, so I don't believe we have quorum. I'll do a quick count. But go ahead, Kate, if you want to introduce someone.
Thanks. So just for everybody on the call, we have hired a new Planning and Community Development Director in Transylvania County, and it's Jeff Adams. And so he's on the call just as kind of an informational this morning, but you'll probably be seeing his name more in the future.
Great. Thank you. Welcome. Emily, you have your hand up.
Yes, it's Emily Brewer with the City of Brevard. So Aaron Bland, I've replaced Aaron Bland as the representative.
Okay, great. All right, I'm making note of that right now.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Does that put us past quorum? Dana, were you doing a count? Okay. All right. While we figure out if we have quorum, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Just a second. Oh. All right.
And I'll just do a quick head count. We have 15 total members, and we have 10 present, 5 missing from my count. So I think we're good to go.
Great.
Thanks y'all for being here.
Yeah, it's important. All right, so we are moving on to item number 2 for those of you listening at home, and that's the approval of our last minutes. If there were any changes or comments, let me know. Otherwise, may I get a motion? Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the last minutes?
I move we approve the last minutes.
Welcome, Emily. Coming in strong. Thank you. How about a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion or changes? Unfortunately, we have to do a roll call vote because we are still in the land of virtual. So I'm going to do as I see you on my screen, which is Jennifer.
Yes.
Miranda. Oh, no. You are under, Elizabeth.
Yes.
Okay. Ely, nope. Kate.
Yes.
Robin.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
We got Emily. Got Elizabeth. Alice,
Yes.
did I miss anybody? I feel like that wasn't 10 people, but okay. All right, the minutes are approved. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item number 3, our upcoming meeting schedule. I am thinking, Nikki, is that you or Dana?
That's me, actually.
Okay, of course, Dana.
All right. So the month of March is really busy for the consortium, and we have 3 meetings taking place, including today's meeting. So we wanted to take a couple minutes to make sure everyone knows what's happening when. So today's meeting is, of course, going to center around a home ARP allocation plan, and we're hoping that will include a vote to make recommendations to City Council towards the end. The next steps in the home ARP process will be a public hearing at City Council, which we've scheduled for March 14th, and a final vote at Council on March 28th. The next meeting of the ARHC is on March 17th from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. That meeting is for the home applicant presentation, so our regular home funding. That will not require a vote, but we do encourage you all to be in attendance, as these meetings are going to be very important as we move forward with our funding recommendations later in the month. The funding recommendations meeting occurs the following week on March 22nd, also from 10 to 11:30. The March 22nd meeting does require a vote, so if you can't attend the meeting, please inform your alternates that they'll need to attend in your place. The funding recommendations this year are going to look a little different from the past years. We've brought on a national consultant, TDA, different than Buncombe County's TDA. They're going to review our home applications and create our funding recommendations this year. And they bring a lot of experience and expertise with the home program to the table. And we're confident that the recommendations they make are going to be in the best interest of the consortium. So if anyone has any questions about the meeting schedule, I'm available. Nikki's also available, so we can answer questions, or you can send those via email.
Thank you, Thana. I will echo that. So those meetings that we need to vote at, please either attend or send your alternate. Okay, thank you for running through the schedule for us. We are moving on to the next item, number 4, which is the presentation of the home ARP allocation plan by Baker Tilly. Ely, is that you? Are you going to run with it, or?
Hey, yes. Good morning, Sage.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, we're happy to kick things off. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ely Mathis. I'm a manager with Baker Tilly's Housing and Economic Development team, which is part of our larger public sector advisory group at Baker Tilly. And we do work with a lot of different federal programs with communities around the country. And lately, we've been doing quite a bit of working on home ARP allocation plans for clients. And I'm actually a former Asheville resident and City of Asheville employee, so we were excited to have the opportunity to come in and work with you all. And I see a couple of familiar faces. I see Matt Cable over there. It's been a while since we've worked together, but good to see you again. We're here today. This is our second time presenting to the consortium board. And previously, when we met, we had just finished up our initial outreach and focus group. So we had a little bit of feedback to present. Now we've actually got the draft plan developed and it's out for public comment. So we'll have a little bit more information to share with you all today. And what we're going to do is walk through a quick PowerPoint that'll give a high level overview of the home ARP program, as well as some of the findings that we've gotten from the different outreach methods that we've done. And then would like to get your feedback on the draft allocation and what we're proposing in the plan. So before we dive into that, I wanted to take a second to go around the horn with our team and give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. And I believe we've got Monique Caston on the call, who's been our project manager for this engagement.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Apologies that I can't be on camera today, but excited to have had the opportunity to work with Asheville and excited to hear your thoughts today as well. So I don't have very much to say, but just hello and good morning.
Thanks, Monique. And then Daniel Giroux from our team is on as well.
Hey, good morning. My name is Daniel Giroux. I have been on board with Baker Tilly for about 7 months. My background before being on this team is in economic development, community development, workforce development. I've really enjoyed working with the Asheville region on this plan. I can't believe it's almost time that we are getting close to wrapping up, and look forward to discussing some of what we found today. I did see Marta jump on, so I will pass it to Marta.
Hopefully my sound and camera are working. Good morning. I'm Marta Purdy with Baker Tilly. I'm a director with an urban planning background, and I'm a UNC Chapel Hill graduate from my master's in planning. So disappointed about the game this weekend, but you know, you win some, you lose some. So great to be here.
Hello, and I'm Baron Bell with Community Development Experts, working in tandem with Baker Tilly. I'm a subject matter expert. I have a 25 years experience in housing and community development. I actually worked in HUD headquarters under the CPD program, a policy director, and I had the great opportunity several years ago of being an elite group of trainers who rolled out both the integrated disbursement and information systems, IDIS, some of you may know about that, and also was the lead manager for the consolidated plan rollout, explaining and training grantees, and even had the fortunate opportunity to train HUD employees on HUD grant programs and policy. So I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Baron. All right, and I'll hand it over to Daniel to take us through our presentation. And again, some of this you all have already seen, so we may go through some of the initial slides a little bit faster, but still want to provide a little bit of context about the Home ARP program and the limitations there.
Okay, thank you, Ely. What we're going to do pretty quickly is run through a review of Home ARP. I know many of you are well versed in the Home program and probably even Home ARP because of the last few months, especially since we've been working with you all. And I know you've been working on this recently as well, or looking into the plan before we started the engagement. We're going to go over the stakeholder consultation process, what we learned from stakeholders in your region, including you all. As well as a public survey process and how that feedback from those two processes help build out the Home ARP plan and the funding allocation. We're going to review the funding allocation and also talk about the next steps of the plan. There are a few next steps we have to go through before the March 31 deadline to submit the home allocation plan. So let's see here. There we go. So the Home Investment Partnership Program, also, before I get going, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to raise your hand. I may not see your hand raised. If I do not, somebody just shout out. You can come off mic. Won't bother me at all. So Home Investment Partnership Program provides grants to state and local governments to create affordable housing for low-income households. And that's, of course, an annual allocation from HUD. From the Home ARP plan, there has been an allocation to the Asheville region of almost $4.7 million to help provide housing, rental assistance, supportive services, and non-congregate shelter, specifically to reduce homelessness and increase housing stability in your region, and $5 billion across the country. All states and local PJs across the country or participating jurisdictions that qualified for an annual home allocation were eligible to receive that funding nationwide. So the eligible populations that this funding can help impact are those that are homeless, those that are at risk of homelessness, those that are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking, and their families. Other populations where providing supportive services or assistance would prevent the family's homelessness or would serve those at greater risk of homelessness, and also veterans and their families that include a veteran that meets one of those preceding criteria. Eligible activities for the funding are the production or preservation of affordable housing, TBRA, supportive services, and we'll go over those supportive services, and the purchase and development of non-congregate shelter. Just wanted to provide you with a quick definition for at risk of homelessness for Home ARP purposes. So with respect to an individual or family, that individual or family must have an income below 30% of the median income for the geographic area. Didn't call it everybody here, but we wanted to at least provide for one county. We called out Buncombe. So for one person, that's $14,400. Two, it's $18,310. Three-person household, $23,030. And a four-person household, $27,750, just to give you an idea of what that 30% of the median income is. that person or family has to be or has to have insufficient resources immediately available to attain housing stability. And under C, they'd have to either have moved frequently because of economic reasons, living in the home of another, has been notified that their right to occupy their current housing living situation will be terminated, live in a hotel or motel, lives in severely overcrowded housing, is exiting an institution, or otherwise lives in housing that has characteristics associated with instability and an increased risk of homelessness. For eligible activities of support services, covers a wide variety from case management and childcare to education, food, outpatient health services, mental health, and outreach services, housing search and counseling, life skills training, assistance with moving costs. That's assistance with moving costs within the defined region. Substance abuse treatment services, transportation, legal services, and employment assistance and job training. And what we were engaged to put together is, of course, the home allocation plan, which describes the proposed activities of how the participating jurisdictions intends to distribute its home ARP funds, based on those supportive services line items we talked about, and based on things like deciding whether to apply it to new affordable housing, non-congregate shelter, TBRA. To receive the balance of the home funds, the allocation plan has to be submitted to HUD by March 31st of this year as an amendment to the fiscal year 2021 annual action plan for review and acceptance. And then allocation plan requirements. What we've been doing and what we still are doing to complete the plan, the consultation process and the public participation process, which we did with stakeholders, as well as community agencies and community members. The needs assessment and gap analysis, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Home ARP activities, so what the funding is going to be used for, what it's being allocated toward. Home ARP production housing goals, which must be established if the funding is being used for, say, TBRA or new affordable housing. Preferences, if any preferences were established as based on populations under those populations mentioned earlier, and home ARP refinancing guidelines. Home ARP funds can be used to refinance affordable housing units. Guidelines have to be established if and only if the funding is being used for that purpose in your area. So we went through 4 focus groups. We met with all 4 of the counties in the Asheville Consortium region. So we met with Madison on the 18th, I believe Henderson on the 19th, and then Transylvania and Buncombe on the 20th of January. And a total of 51 agencies were invited to participate in those meetings. 42 individuals representing 30 of those agents participated in at least one focus group or a direct phone call discussion. And all of those comments are listed in the allocation plan and can be found in the allocation plan. But during discussions with those groups of stakeholders, 3 areas of needs were identified and really highly discussed and talked about as potential uses of the funds. And those 3 are the production and preservation of affordable housing units, non-congregate shelter, and supportive services. On the public participation side, a public survey was released both in digital format, English and Spanish, to the region, and 302 responses were received. 18 of those 302 were Spanish language surveys, so those are included within that 302 number. Just going to go over a few questions that were asked that really identify, they're the best questions from the survey that identify where the public wants to see the funding being utilized or used. So one question was asked to, or asked the individuals taking the surveys to rank the community housing needs, and construction of new affordable housing was ranked as the most important. So as you can see, out of these 4, survey respondents could rank 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the construction of new or construction of new affordable housing units additional emergency shelter, so non-congregate shelter, additional supportive services or housing vouchers for low income to moderate income individuals. And of those four, around 43% chose the construction of new affordable housing. So that, of course, went alongside the stakeholder feedback we received. And when asked to select the greatest single need for housing in the community, affordable rental housing units was ranked as the greatest there. So at 56%, non-congregate emergency shelter came in at 13%, and then 31% of people said transitional housing with supportive services. So again, that goes alongside the stakeholder feedback we received. Those questions were similarly asked. And specifically focused on services and the greatest gap in services. As you can tell, mental health services came out above and beyond everything else with 146 respondents. So only one response was, or only one line item was able to be chosen. So, you know, you could only choose mental health services or only transportation services here. We really wanted to gauge, you know, that top priority that someone you know, had to force a response for one. So mental health services obviously came out on top here.
Daniel, I did want to jump in and clarify something too. But one thing we saw in some of the comments for people that selected other, and then also some feedback that we got, a lot of people were considering mental health and substance abuse to sort of be a similar type of service. So I think that number where you're seeing mental health services really kind of off the charts. I would also consider that to include substance abuse disorders as well.
Is it possible that y'all could maybe note that on the slide or something, or share the other words just as it continues to see reviews?
Yes, absolutely.
And those
public, you know,
those other comments are noted in the allocation plan as well. So they're listed, but we can definitely do that.
Yeah, it's helpful. I think sometimes, you know, when we put out public documents like this, people they love the charts. So
Sure.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on survey feedback or stakeholder feedback? Okay, if not, I am going to pass the next slides to Baron. Baron, when you want me to advance, just let me know and I'll do that for you.
Okay, thank you. So here we have our point in time survey information that gives us information on the number of beds and units for families in January, which is the point of time where the survey is taken, and also the number of persons who were enumerated as being homeless, sheltered, and homeless unsheltered. So what you see over there to the left, we have at the top emergency shelter. So on the point of time survey, we had 67 beds available for families within 33 units. And then we had 233 adult only beds. So for transitional housing, we had 59 beds in 21 units, 218 adult only beds, which tend to be single beds. Permanent housing, we had 118 family beds, 536 adult only, and other permanent housing, 156 beds in 53 units. Adult only beds, we had 247. So what this information shows for adults only, there are more units in the inventory that are available for homeless persons than families. If we go to the middle of the chart there, where it says homeless population at the top, and we immediately go to the last two the rows 3 and 2, you see that for sheltered homeless, we had 34 who were sheltered. That's 34 families. And then adults, we had 412, pretty much single adults who were homeless on the point in time survey. Our veteran count for that was pretty significant, 142 homeless vets, but who were sheltered. Our unhomeless population for families, there were only 9 households. We shouldn't say only 9 households, but relatively speaking, in terms of the numbers, we had 9 family households who were unsheltered as compared to 291 adult households that were unsheltered. And we also had between the two groups 101 homeless individuals sheltered, 60 sheltered, 41 unsheltered, who were victims of domestic violence or stalking. So what we did, and it's important to understand, the gap analysis is not a pure mathematic calculation of what we see in the point in time survey and the beds available. Well, we have other information that we pulled from. There was an outreach study that was just recently done locally, and some other studies that was done locally that gave us information on the number of units. So taking information from these other documents, we estimated a gap of 60 beds, an additional 15 units needed for family, and 285 beds would be needed in an inventory as an estimate for adults only. All right, Ely, we can go to that next chart. Now, our next.
Aaron, if I may make just one comment, I just want to, it may be obvious, but I did want to just share that this is for the region. I know that we've been looking a lot at some other data, but just I did want to clarify that this was for the entire region. And so we're pulling from the Asheville-Buncombe continuum of care, but then also the other regional continuums.
Yeah, so we had special data, and Andrew was helpful with that. We had special data that we added to those numbers. So that's not even the balance of state. That's only for the 3 counties, Madison, Henderson, Transylvania. So the data is specific for that, added to the Asheville-Buncombe point in time survey count. So thanks for that.
Thank
Now,
you. Just one more thing, similar to my last request, if we could somehow have that data on this slide, that'd be helpful. That little, thank you.
All right. Yeah, Daniel, we can go to the next slide. All right, so this slide right here, it's getting at another type of qualifying population group. And this population group are not persons at risk of homelessness per se, but they're individuals who are at greater risk of housing instability. So at risk of homelessness, we saw on the slide, there's generally persons who are 30% and below median, that's adjusted for family side. But the other category of greatest risk at housing instability, then the incomes go up to 50% of the median area income there. And so this data analysis comes from Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy data, CHAS data. And HUD does special tabulations each year from American Community Survey data released by the Census Bureau, and they take 5-year estimates. So the most recent 5-year estimate available for the Asheville region in the 3 counties is from 2015 to 2019. And so what we see here, the total number of rental units was 63,786, but units affordable to households that are 30% of the AMI or at risk of homeless, there was only 3,528 units available. For that other population of greatest risk of housing instability, we had more units available, 11,005. And then as we go further down, we have an estimate of the level of need for household. And this level of need for the household, and this is not our own estimate of need. These come from the ARP template, if you will. Households who are at need, determined to be at need, are those who are, 1, have 30% of median income, and they're severe cost burden, or they have one of the severe housing problems. And one of those severe housing problems is cost burden. They're paying more than 50% of their monthly income towards rent. And they also suffer overcrowding, more than 1.5 persons per room. So at that 0 to 30% income, we had 9,463 households who were at that income level who also experienced some sort of severe cost burden. And then we had 7,028 households, according to the data estimates, at the 30 to 50% who also had some form of severe cost burden. So what we estimated from the data analysis and some other report and studies, that we have a gap of 6,115 affordable housing units that need to be added to the inventory to provide housing to not just the population at the income levels, but those who are at greater risk at the populations at these income levels. So that's the thing to understand with these data charts. Of course, we know it's more facilities that's needed, it's more housing that could be produced, but this housing and these funds are for those who have greater risk of homelessness and greatest risk of housing instability. Okay, Daniel, I think that's it for our data.
Yeah, and I'm happy to jump in here and talk about this a little bit. So this obviously is outlined in a lot more detail within the allocation plan, but this is a summary table of the breakdown of funding based on all the feedback that we've heard and all the different discussions that have happened. And I'll take you all through this. So we'll actually start at that middle line, development of affordable rental housing. Again, based on the survey data and the meetings that we had, that really came forward as the highest need across the board. Originally, when we started this process, I thought we would see more variability between the different counties, the different jurisdictions, but really across the board, we were hearing from stakeholders and community members that affordable rental housing is the top priority. So what we're recommending based on the results that we've seen was the majority of the funding, 64%, would go towards development of affordable rental housing. And then a smaller but still pretty substantial portion, 21% of the funding, or $1 million, would go towards supportive services. And supportive services, even though it didn't rank quite as high on the surveys as far as priorities, we did hear a lot in our conversations with stakeholders that any funding going towards affordable housing should have wraparound supportive services connected to it, that was a huge priority. So that's why we are recommending allocating a certain amount of funding for supportive services in addition to affordable rental housing. And then finally, the 15% for admin and planning, that's kind of the standard allocation that you'd see with most of the allocation plans. In reality, at the end of the day, it may not require the full 15% for that, but we thought it was important to reserve 15% for it now to make sure there's adequate funding to administer the programs throughout their life cycle. And as things get a little bit further down the line, there's always the opportunity to go to HUD and modify this in the future and reallocate some of that funding if it's determined that it's not all needed under admin and planning. But again, we did think it was important to make sure there's more than enough there for now. You certainly don't want to be in a position where you don't have the staff capacity to, administer these grants. And before we talk about that, I just wanted to go on to the next slide to talk about just the last couple of steps in our process. So there's a few important dates coming up. The plan is going live today for public comment. So again, everything we're looking at now is still, the final draft version. We will be incorporating feedback from this group and the public comment that we received through March 20th. And then there will be the formal public hearing of the city council meeting on March 14th, where again, we'll be able to take additional public comment. And then the plan will finally be presented to council on March 28th, and that will be the final plan for adoption so that we can meet HUD's submission deadline of March 31st. So again, I want to say that, we are leaning pretty strongly in the direction of the allocation table that we just showed you, but there obviously is still opportunity for feedback, and we definitely want to hear from this group as well as members of the public.
Hey, one thing that I want to mention briefly that we didn't in terms of some of our decisions, the Asheville housing market has the highest fair market in the state of North Carolina. So briefly for comparison purposes, in the Asheville metro area, the fair market for a 2-bedroom apartment is $1,378. In the Charlotte, Concord, Gastonia area, that same 2-bedroom at fair market is $1,155. So in the Asheville area, your rentals are like $200 and upwards higher than any other place in the entire state of North Carolina. So that's something to take into consideration in terms of the allocation of funds, particularly for, the affordable housing units.
Yeah, Daniel, if you could flip back to the previous slide really quick. I think it's important to note, obviously, we heard across the board there's need, and it far outpaces the funding that's available. We know there is interest in shelters and also tenant-based rental assistance. But what we're presenting here really reflects what we heard as the highest priorities for this one-time allocation of funding. So that, again, it's not to say that there isn't a need or a desire for these other elements, but that this was identified as the highest priority. And I know tenant-based rental assistance or housing vouchers is an item that was talked about several times, but again and again, the feedback that we heard is there's a lack of available units in the marketplace to fully utilize existing vouchers. And after some of those discussions, we got some preliminary data that I think for 2022, over 50% of vouchers expired before housing could be identified. So again, that just points to that huge demand for additional units on the marketplace. And this about $3 million can help alleviate that and make it easier to maximize the use of existing vouchers.
You know, and also one of the things that Ely and I had to have a conversation about as we were finalizing the data, and we've done quite a few of these now, when it came to vacant housing units, the Asheville area in the last American Community Survey data, you all had, I think, 20,000 some odd plus units that were available, but not in the rental market. And they were just available for like rentals or vacation. And, you know, and Ely was like, Baron, I have one question. I want you to look at this. I said, Ely, you saw that? I saw that too. I've never seen that high a number of
20,000? You're saying
it was
20,000?
approximately
We're
what
talking
20
about all the counties, not just Asheville, right?
the
Right,
region. Yeah, for the region. Yeah. for the-
20,000?
I would have to look back at the numbers, and I would say unoccupied, meaning that they're not permanently occupied. So that doesn't mean they're available for rent on the market. What Baron's saying is a lot of those are not even Airbnbs. I think a lot of it is second homes. So
Second homes. It's mostly second homes. Yeah, I think we have the largest. Asheville City has the largest percentile of its housing being used for short-term use, I believe, of anywhere in the nation. At least that was a couple of years ago. But we're still only at like 3%. So I think what you're seeing is the big second home market, which has been estimated as much as 15% of housing stock. Okay, just want to make sure we weren't saying what I thought that was going on. Okay.
No, we were saying it's not available for rental.
Right.
Yeah.
Are we moving into Q&A time right now, or?
Well, I wanted to see if Nikki or someone from the city had additional comments.
I think that's it for now. I do want to share with committee members that we are seeking action on behalf of the Home Consortium today. This is absolutely the Home Consortium's plan. This is our time to really talk, get feedback, and get clear on where the consortium really wants to see these numbers. So I just want to say thank you to Baker Tilly for all the work they've done, and thank you for everyone who has participated thus far in this plan. We're really at an important moment to really finalize where we want to see these investments, and then allow the process to proceed in order to make that deadline. So again, just appreciate everyone, and then also hoping that at the conclusion of our conversations that we will be seeking action from the consortium today. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair to facilitate those questions.
Thank you, Nikki.
Yes,
really. No, that's
if
okay.
I could just make one more clarification
Sure.
too, you know, to Nikki's point, at this point in the process, we do need to get action on what we're seeing here, kind of the high level allocation of these funds. But we don't have to put in specifics about exact projects that would be moving forward, or, you know, exactly how the funding would be utilized other than these higher level buckets. So obviously, you know, there's going to be ongoing discussions down the line about that. But at this point, we did want to make sure that we had, you know, approval at least at this level of the breakdown.
Thank you, team. And Baker Tilly folks, I really appreciate all your effort thus far. I'll echo the sentiments of Nikki in that regard. I think we're going to move into a little Q&A. And I saw Kate had her hand up for a minute, but maybe now it's down.
Oh, it was just a quick question about where should we direct people who have comments during the public comment period?
That is a good question.
And I may ask Thana, I know it will be posted and published on our community development website. And so we can share that out to this group and to our listserv later today. This was really our first stop, but yes, it will be made live for that public comment on the city's webpage, and we'll provide that link.
Great. Okay, so just to be clear, we're really we're voting today, really not even just giving a nod. We're voting today that we believe this is a good allocation set of buckets, you know, $1 million for supportive services, almost 3 for unit development, the full 15% for administrative. Does anyone have any discussion points or questions, comments, concerns about this potential breakdown? Go ahead, Emily.
Perhaps I missed it in the big document, but is there anywhere that you list the priority areas for the supportive service investment? I know that it's talked about a lot in the comment period, but is there anywhere in kind of the allocation side of it where it outlines and says, you know, mental health and substance abuse is a top priority or anything like that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's not because we don't have to be that specific in the
Okay.
allocation. It's just the overall general eligible categories, so that you can decide, you know, if even further how it needs to be distributed exactly.
Okay, thank you.
That flexibility. Mhm.
Great question. But yeah, this is very just broad sweeps here thus far. Any other questions? You know, I know for myself personally, when I first heard about this 4.7 come in, you know, we had some stalls, which I think ended up to be better for us because we now understand the fallout and aftermath of the pandemic in a longer view, right? Than the decisions we'd have made if we'd done this 6 or 8 months after the award. I had thought for a while that this would be potential money for a non-congregate shelter. And now that I've seen all the research and heard from their input and so on throughout all the communities, it does seem to me like this makes sense. I know I have a personal hesitation that it seems like we're essentially doing more of the same, but I guess that's almost like saying we were on the right track all along. We just can't produce enough, fast enough, and at the lowest rate. So I've found my way to being comfortable with this personally. And it almost feels like more, other than the supportive services chunk, which maybe we want to discuss if 1 million is a good percentage, but other than that, it seems almost like an extra round of our other financing. So we're not being asked to do too much different in that regard. Does anybody else have any comments or thoughts? Nat Cable, nothing?
Sage, I knew you would. Well, I did. So I understand because at the county we have projects that span many years beyond the initial allocations and requests for project proposals and then contracting, and that takes some time. But particularly with construction projects, they have the longest period that you have to monitor them, but the shortest kind of implementation period. Supportive services, you're monitoring, more regularly. They're different. But I do think, being responsive to kind of the broader community, the question about the administrative and planning being nearly as much as the investment in supportive services, at 15%, which I understand is allowed. But I think it will be helpful if we kind of understood the period over which that's anticipated to be expended, what that's associated with, because the position for a couple of years, being supported makes sense. But I don't think that, position for that extended period of time at that level of funding may be warranted. So I would love to, hear from either Baker Tilly or the city on kind of why that number makes sense, or what the real anticipated expenditure is, because we can, as I said, reallocate, but we don't want to come out of the gate, because this is kind of a jarring amount if you think about our allocation to reserve for administering the funds.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak to that, and then maybe Ely can assist if needed. But so when we asked the same question, absolutely, is it needed to have that entire 15%? And when looking at the HUD plan, there's an option that allows for the participating jurisdiction, the PJ, of which the city is the PJ on behalf of the home consortium. There's an option where the PJ would then administer direct services in some cases. And so, thinking about how something like that would be very resource intensive for administration, But to your point, Matt, thinking about if these funds are used for rental housing, much like our existing home program and or supportive services, it really comes down to how many potential contracts would we see out of these funds, meaning funded projects within each of these funding amounts, and what would that administrative burden look like. And so I kind of ran two scenarios. When I ran, it's from 2023 to 2030, looking at the annual basis for a full-time staff member plus benefits plus training, service, advertising, things like that. And also technical assistance that we would budget year over year in case we did need some support, i.e. Baker Tilly in this case. But when I ran that out for the full grant period, 2030, we did hit that mark of seeing that projection actually exceeds the 704 that is there currently. But that's a full-time staff member for the remaining years of the grant. If we want to look at a different approach, I also ran a projection for the next 5 years. So really having a 5-year scenario, a full-time staff member, and then reserving a little bit of a technical assistance budget. I'm looking at on my screen, $7,000 per year in those far off years. So it'd be 28, 29, and 30. And that actually came in just under 600,000 to do that. And so to me, that was our low and high, again, being conservative with the idea that if we were to need to reallocate these administrative funds when we're getting closer to full uptake of the other budget amounts, and we know kind of what we're dealing with at that point, that's always our option. But I just wanted to be transparent about some of the numbers that I ran so that the consortium could understand that. And so that, to me, that's our range. Happy to then ask any or answer any questions, and then also see if there's a request to amend the table.
Thank you for that background, Nikki. And great question, Matt. I actually feel a little uncomfortable about it too. So I'm like, I hear what you say, Nikki. So you carried it out for the full 10 years, and then you did another scenario where it was 5 years and so on. But I'm like, $3 million in allocation for affordable rental housing could go in one swoop, right? We do that pretty quickly. I know, at least in our city. And I feel like even on the county level, I think they got like $50 million in asks or something. I heard. That rumor could be incorrect, sorry, but maybe a lot more projects than they could ever fund. So I'm not sensing this is a 5-year thing. Now, what I don't know is after we vote and everybody goes home and feels good that money was awarded, what that really means on the staff shoulders. Like, is that years of follow-up paperwork and stuff like that? And do you envision that going out 5 years? Because I'm not sure. And then the supportive services, I guess, is an unknown. But if we're just handing money to agencies that do it, again, it's just the follow-up paperwork, right?
I'm thinking with that 5-year, like what I'm kind of thinking about is the process that we would facilitate through the home consortium to make the funding allocations. Let me back up a second. It would be, and this is actually about process too, so I'll update as well as share thoughts on budget, but looking at, our next steps is to submit the home art plan at the end of March. Once we get approval of that plan, then the staff member will be leading the request for proposals process. So really saying, okay, here's what we're looking to fund, these two types, and here's the request for proposals for projects that fit these two types within our 4-county region. And then after that happens, the proposals will be received, they will be reviewed, and then put forward to the consortium for a vote. So that, and then making those allocations would take that time. Then thereafter, projects have to undergo certain requirements that HUD of HUD to really be eligible. So if it's the environmental review, if it's other components that must be administered by staff, then by the time projects actually come out of the ground and get built, dispersing funds, I do think that would take 5 years if we're actually looking at the life cycle of a project just to complete a funding period. Then the long game there is also then the monitoring, ensuring that the units are occupied by the populations that we are intending to serve here, and that we have that reporting that then funnels back. And so in my mind, that at least that's really what for me proved to be the 5-year mark at the least.
So just to be clear, for this particular grant funds, generally on the home program, you have 5 years to spend With this particular grant, it expires on September 30th, 2030. So there's a little longer that you have, and that's why there's an expectation of 5%, increase where the regular home funds is 10%. One of the things also to consider with monitoring is very highly probable that you'll have more turnover of home assistant units because you're dealing with an income category that's different than regular home funds, which is generally 60% of median. But for these funds, you're talking about 30% and 50% of median. So it's not going to have the same sort of revenue from rents. So you have different, more negotiation, more pro forma analysis and things, a bit more to consider administratively than the regular use of home funds where units are rented out to persons at higher income levels at that 60%.
And I'll jump in since I posed kind of that initial question. The difference I think here in our regular home programming is that you have a sustaining source of administrative funding from year to year for position support so that there are open ongoing projects as well as new RFP issuance. So this is kind of a point in time where you're going to need a position at least in a limited time frame. So understanding the time frame of implementing is helpful. I think, I understand being more conservative and setting aside that 15%. But I am more interested in the discussion on the 5 years, just because kind of 3 years to really get it off the ground. And construction projects would necessarily have delays. So if you have the 5-year window, I think you could cover doing most of that. The thing that always exists and that we have to be aware of, and I want to acknowledge, in a public setting, is that there is ongoing monitoring that this administrative funding will not cover in future years if you have an open loan or other kind of agreement or a particularly constructed site that you're needing to verify remains in compliance. But I am curious if we could be a little less conservative, and by that I mean look at that 5-year funding level need that Nikki has modeled as perhaps the basis, and then reallocate some of that to the construction funding amount, because as our chair has mentioned, one project could easily expend all that or more.
Anyone else want to chime in on this?
I'll chime in really quick. I definitely agree with what Matthew said on that, especially because if we're talking about larger contract amounts, I would imagine that, perhaps this is oversimplifying, but if you're only monitoring 3 big projects, perhaps that has left less of an administrative role. And as we said, that there are big projects that need this kind of level of support. And perhaps that money, as you said, would be better spent on the development side of things rather than the administrative side of things. I would also be interested in hearing the process for reallocating that money if it's not used. So let's say instead you use $600,000 instead of that 704 or 705. What would the process look like in reallocating that with HUD?
Thanks for that question, Emily. And I'll let Barron talk about the reallocation process, but I also did want to mention, to your point, so there would be an RFP posted for a notice of funding availability for these different funds. And your point, if it's 1 or 2 large developments that get selected, the burden will be significantly reduced. But at this point, because everything is still very high level, we're not sure how many projects would actually be awarded under both categories. So you could definitely see a situation where it's a much larger number of applicants that are getting a smaller amount of funding, and the administrative burden is a lot higher. So that's why we wanted to be more conservative and reserve as much as possible, knowing that you could go through that reallocation process later. But Barron, I'll let you jump in there about that.
Yes. So once the plan is approved, should you desire to reallocate funding, What kicks in first is the local jurisdiction's citizen participation plan under the CDBG home and ESG programs. Now, generally, it will be a percentage amount of an allocation change that would trigger a substantial amendment. And then you have to undergo additional citizen participation requirements in hearings to allow citizens to have an opportunity to comment and give their input on the allocation change. And once you do that, it's generally a 30-day public comment period on the actual change, and then another 30-day period perhaps to get their actual feedback before a document is submitted, even that citizens and local persons are commenting on. So you're probably talking about another 2-month process if you're going to reallocate funds under the grant. Generally, these don't. An amendment doesn't require another submission to HUD for approval. But when the grantee is monitored, you do send at the end of your year, you submit a consolidated annual performance and evaluation report where you tell HUD about the amendment that you did, and then they may monitor you to make sure that the citizen participation processes were followed. But it won't require like going back to HUD a second time for the same level of approval.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Jonathan?
I just wanted to make sure on the monitoring piece, I can't recall what the requirement for monitoring or for the affordability period on a construction project. Is it the same as for home, or did HUD set a separate limit for the affordability or the compliance period on home ARP?
Most of those things are the same. And I have that up. I don't know if I can.
I want to say I remember there was for the non-congregate shelter construction, it was it had to be used for at least 10 years in compliance, but I couldn't right off the top of my head recall the affordability period or compliance for construction.
Yeah, I'm not 100% certain, Jonathan, right now on that. For the different new construction and rehab, generally have different requirements. But I'll come back to it if I can get it up.
I know Robin has to leave in a minute. Robin, did you have any thoughts you wanted to share before you go to your next meeting?
No, not really. I'm okay with these percentages, and the reason is I think it might be best to be prepared, even though we can only predict what may happen. And I'm also for us having higher wages in the region and for the city to be able to attract and keep staff in the community development department, which has been a struggle of the last few years. And I get it. It is sometimes where I work too. So, those are my thoughts, and I'm really sorry that I have to go. I really appreciate all the work Baker Tilly put into this project, and I've been writing down some data that I plan to use in some of my advocacy work. So thank you.
Thank you, Robin, and great point about the wages. I mean, just speaking from participatory jurisdiction over here, and I think Jonathan was maybe our 4th or 5th person we've lost in just as many years. So we are having a problem keeping staff as well in this department. Go ahead, Kate, and then I think I saw John Connett raise his hand.
Oh, I think John was first, so he can go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Sorry, my camera's not working. But yeah, John Connett, just agree with the comment about, I'm okay with the 15%. Just only ask that, and this will be up to this group is that if there are openings, let's make sure we fill the openings as quickly as possible so that we can keep the projects moving forward. I think I'd be more concerned about leaving this allocation if we had a lot of vacancies in the department and it went a long period of time without keeping the projects moving forward. So as long as we can keep the positions filled, and I know there's a lag time for hiring and those kind of things, but just make it a priority. And really, I guess I question what will another $100,000, if that 100,000 will support the staff and, keep these positions filled and keep the projects moving along, and we may get secondary benefits in the other home programs. I think it's a positive, and what will the $100,000? I'd say it bumps it up to, 2.1 million. I mean, so on the development. So just those are the questions. Those are my comments.
Thank you, John. Go ahead, Kate.
So I definitely understand where Matthew's coming from with the percent of administrative fees, and I normally with our typical recommendations, I like to be able to impact as many projects as possible, and so if the upper end of administrative could potentially also help us get at more projects with the 2.9, then I would be in favor of that too.
Jonathan Jones.
And the administrative costs that would also include, and maybe this is more for Nikki, is that includes the potential for more consultant participation. So, I mean, having been part of the kickoff of this process with Baker Tilly and being part of the city staff, I think that that role of the consultant has been helpful in maintaining some of the continuity as there's been turnover and, just some of the unexpected challenges over the last 2 years and not knowing what we might be looking at over the next couple of years. So just wanted to basically confirm that some of that budget would include the potential work for consultant support.
And yes, when I am looking at my screen with the budget projections, that budget is based on a salary line item and then secondly, a contracted services or TA, technical assistance line item. And looking at about 7,000 per year is what I've got thus far. And again, the low side of my budget projection, when I looked at this, I would keep that 7,000 throughout the life cycle of until 2030, basically. So that would continue. And then otherwise the staff would be for a 5-year period, the full-time staff. And so again, and plus with training and supplies, just, general administrative items. And I said that came in just under 600. I mean, I think if there was a desire to see that, I mean, really, because I'm also looking at these numbers of wouldn't it be nice to just have around 3 million on the development of rental housing, just so that would also be something to clearly understand as we communicate now, moving forward from here to council. Maybe that's just something that would be acceptable to everyone on the call and as we move forward as well. So again, looking for any other conversation that would help get us there.
So Jonathan, the compliance period is 15 years. 15 years.
Go ahead, Matt Cable.
So I think this is great discussion, and I'm learning a lot about kind of how you're modeling this, and it's making sense to me. I think you're always in the best position when you can defend an assessment of what you're saying you need to administer a program. And I think you can show, different scenarios that support this amount or a lesser amount. Let's say, and I'm just thinking about the practicalities of reallocating later. That is a process. It's not ideal. So I know that our goal would be to get this as close to what we actually think would happen. But you go out to a call for proposals, you allocate everything in year one, you realize your administrative need is going to be less over time because of that upfront allocation or whatever. What is the practicality then of doing an entire additional process, right? Like, is there going to be enough money that you're saving to then go through another call, an application process, a reallocation? So I'm thinking about just making sure we set it correctly, because I do think if you have $100,000 that become available in year 5 to create another process, might not be because then you're going to have the same issue where you need the staff support position. So just, any thoughts? And I think that, again, this will be a question for Nikki about the reality of reallocating in a later year.
Right. I think hearing, I mean, it sounds like a mini process of what we just have done, right? So that is also burdensome. So, and again, like looking at that budget projection, I mean, the exact number of my total is 595. So that's a full-time staffer for 5 years, technical assistants until 2030, and then associated training and supplies and budget for public notice and things like that. So that number was 595, and now I think we could look at something, if there was a need to look at something less than that, 575, and then that helps. It sounds like what I've heard is I've been attributing that savings to slot and the development of affordable housing piece. So happy to look at that. I mean, I think it sounds like that's something that perhaps would be incorporated into a motion if so desired.
I was just doing a little math on my end, sorry. I mean, if we wanted to, in that realm, just real quick math, if we made it 3.1 million for affordable housing, that would pull 105,000 from that administrative planning number. And it'd be sitting around 6, which surpasses what Nikki just said she's comfortable with and is in line with her Plan B scenario, but gets another 100,000 for housing. I'll tell you, I'm a little indifferent on this. I think it was John that made the point, I'm not sure if $100,000 will make or break a project that's coming to us for $1 million, say, but if the staff can't administer it, that could break a project, I guess. I'd like to hear from the group. What are y'all thinking? Any other feedback? Because right now we're about to make a motion. It sounded like maybe Matt Cable's going to make a motion to do the Plan B and move it to 600 and so on.
Yeah, I mean, and ultimately to Chair, you're going to have another role in this when you get to approve the allocation at the council level. I feel like, the most defensible amount, given what Nikki has shared, is a $600,000 allocation. It's slightly above what she's projected in 5 years. That does put them, if we were to recommend $600,000 for the admin and planning, above the regular 10%, but not quite to the 15 max as well. So I would be comfortable at the $600,000 level. I think the $1 million amount makes sense, with the balance being on construction, which
can we just make it cleaner and make it a 3.1 million? I mean,
well, and I think the question is balancing out somewhere. Something's not going to be a good round number, so
it'll be the planning. The planning will be something like 599, 600 or something, 599, 200 or something. It'll be that number, but the housing would have a clean 3.1.
And I'm in favor of a slight adjustment down. Again, more than the 10% we normally see in home, but I think more in line with a 5-year implementation plan, just because I do think there's such need. We're going to be able to put these funds out.
I think so too. I think with the increase in cost, the timing of it all, I wish we had enough money for all the projects, but this won't feel like a whole lot. Okay, so what I think I heard, and I'll reiterate it, and if you agree, then you could just say, yes, I'll make that motion, was that we are wanting to change the development of affordable rental housing to a full $3.1 million even. And the change will affect administrative and planning funding, bringing it somewhere down around $599 and some dollars. I can do that math if it really needs to happen.
I believe that's 599,862.
Okay. So how about I make a motion? I rarely do, but I will. I'll make a motion that we Approve these buckets with the following changes: 1 million for supportive services, 3.1 million for development of affordable rental housing, and 599,862 available for administrative and planning.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Emily. Any further discussion or concerns?
Before we vote on that, and I know the kind of the lack of real need for TBRA in Transylvania was definitely echoed in our discussion. But I just wanted to ask, and I don't have my sheet in front of me of our normal funding allocations, but historically, could someone give a percentage of tenant-based rental assistance money that ends up coming back to be reallocated versus other buckets of funding, just before we give that nothing?
I don't know if we have, and so let me just see if I understand your question correctly. So what you would like to understand is how much TBRA is reallocated on an annual basis by the home consortium. I don't know offhand. I'm curious if either Barron or Ely may have insight here, and it looks like Jonathan might have something to add to here too. So why don't we go Jonathan, and then maybe Ely or Barron can chime in.
Looking at the history of the consortium's funding of TBRA, those grants usually aren't unspent and returned. They usually do get spent down. I think there has been historically some lag time on that spend down, so it would be great for those funds to be used, on a quicker timetable. But they don't often get just wholesale returned to the consortium for redistribution.
Okay, that helps. Thanks. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that before we just kind of wrote that section off completely.
Thank you, Kate. I appreciate that. Anyone else before we go to a virtual roll call vote? Okay. I'm going to go around the screen like I see you on there. I can't see all of you anymore. Can someone take presentation mode down, please? Even smaller. Okay, Jennifer.
Yes.
And we're voting right here. So aye. Okay, Alice?
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
Jonathan Jones? So weird.
Aye.
Now you're voting. Matt
It
Cable?
Aye.
Emily?
Aye.
Great first start too. John?
Aye.
I know Elizabeth was on here somewhere.
Aye.
Okay, and am I missing anybody? Robin had to leave. Did I miss anybody? Okay. All right, the motion has passed, and we have made our first initial step, and this will move on to the Asheville City Council. Matt Cable, go ahead.
Sorry, I know we've taken our action on this item. I was just going to mention that county staff had shared some feedback and comments just on the plan draft itself with city staff as well. So I know that's not what we're really voting on, but we have provided some feedback on that, just
great.
from our perspective after reviewing the document. So we appreciate the work Baker Tilly did, and we're glad that this is moving forward. So thanks.
And just a general comment, I'm really thankful. We had our council retreat last week for a couple of days, and it came up that historically Buncombe County, Asheville City, all you other counties, that we didn't really have a great working relationship or symbiotic move on housing. And I just really it reminded me how important this committee is. So thank you to everybody. And I'm really glad that our counties are working together with our cities and everything. And it just feels right. Like a regional approach feels good. And I'm thankful that we're all participating, that everybody could be here today to make quorum as well. Yay. I think that's an applause from Elizabeth, not a hand raise. Great. Okay, so that will, for those of you listening at home, conclude item number 5. We're moving on to item number 6, which is public comment. Dana, did we have anybody on the phone just dying to speak to us about how important this is?
No, there's no public comment.
All right. I guess we answered all the questions. And that means that we have done what we came here to do. Thank you everyone for your time, and we are adjourned. We'll see you soon.